A foundational issue in the field of cybersecurity is the current paradigm of moralizing certain people or actions as being good versus evil. A couple of quick examples of this is the common categorization of different types of, let's say, people as being black hat versus white hat hackers, or even the term ethical hacking. Now, these categorizations can be sometimes useful. For instance, it might be helpful to differentiate somebody who employs legal versus illegal means of hacking. However, these terms are more often used to categorize people as being good versus evil. We even describe these sorts of people who are, let's say, black hat hackers as being bad actors. Now, this particular proclivity to moralize, it doesn't hurt the people who are described as bad actors. The people that it hurts the most are the security professionals and the people under their care whom they train. I'm going to explain why. See, the problem with moralizing is that whenever you moralize a thing, what you're doing is you're not taking the objective world in per se. Instead, what you're doing is you're repackaging whatever it is that you're processing according to your moral judgments, and you're oversimplifying it according to the level of your own stupidity and understanding, right? If you can cast aside your judgments for a moment and just see what's happening, you can see the full picture. You can see the logical connections between things and you can understand it. Now, the reason why you'd want to understand somebody who is what, let's say, a hacker of any sorts is because if you do not understand their methods and their mindset, you're absolutely helpless to prevent their attacks against an organization. You know, it's interesting because there's two kinds of people. This is sort of a black and white thinking, but there's a phenomenon as of late of people describing themselves as having high EQ. Sometimes these people even describe themselves as empaths, and they often sort of boast of their understanding of other people, right? What they do, in my observation, because I've observed these people, what they do in my observation is they observe people who have been exploited in some sense. And what they exhibit is a reflexive empathy and compassion towards them. And with that comes sort of moral judgments. And they confuse their reflexive moral judgments as having an understanding and knowledge of people. But in my experience, the sorts of people who really understand people are not empaths, not people who have quote unquote high EQ. The people who understand other people are perhaps systemizers and people you might even go on to describe as, let's say, predatory to some extent. Now, I'm going to explain why that is. Whenever somebody, let's say a predatory individual, is surveying their environment, they're assessing all of the systems in their environment. This can include technical systems, social systems, political systems, and people, because people are information systems. They are examining their environment for vulnerabilities. And whenever they identify one, they immediately begin trying to identify a means of exploiting that vulnerability. And whenever they figure that out, that vulnerability is now perceived as an opportunity. And the pursuit of that vulnerability activates a part of the brain that is the anticipatory reward system. And so they get a literal high as they're pursuing these vulnerabilities within any given system. And so that's a deeply rewarding system for these people going out and finding vulnerabilities in the first place and exploiting them and getting some sort of gain from it. It's so funny because I often hear that, let's say, bad actors, black hat hackers, they're often motivated by profit. Nobody ever talks about the fact that a lot of times these people are actually just motivated by the hunt of the vulnerability to begin with, right? They're wanting to hunt down weaknesses, and whenever you find one, it's a heck of a rush. And no one ever talks about that because they don't actually understand it. So it's important to understand how these sorts of people think so that you can get, you know, and here's the thing, it's interesting because, that's one, if you understand that, then you can really understand the use of, let's say, developing something like a honeypot for your organization, right? Because, if they perceive a vulnerability, if they're a particularly immature uh, let's call them just a hacker, just generally speaking. I'm not going to moralize them. If they're immature, their impulses might get the best of them, and they might not be able to help themselves, but simply to jump on that vulnerability. That's why it's called a honeypot, right? You can use that to your advantage. So what I would recommend more generally is to develop an appreciation for the predatory instinct that, let's say, drives certain hackers to go and try to find weaknesses in systems to begin with. Um, Here's an interesting analogy to consider. I once used to think that there were sheep and there were wolves, but I no longer believe that. What I believe now is that you have wolves and you have dogs, right? You have wolves they have a natural understanding of their, let's say, predatory instincts. And maybe they've integrated that and maybe they haven't. But then what you have are dogs. Dogs they used to be wolves and then they were tamed and they were taught by society, in our case, that being a wolf is bad, it's evil. And the problem with that is if you believe that and you internalize that, then you can't reap the benefits of utilizing that instinct. It's really important to appreciate that if we didn't have a predatory instinct, we wouldn't have the society that we have today. I'm going to explain how that is actually the case. The reason that our brains developed so rapidly, we became so intelligent, is because we started to eat meat. Now, the reason we started to eat meat is because we developed a predatory instinct, right? And so our intelligence co-evolved with with the evolution of our predatory instinct, and so you don't get to have one without the other. You might say nowadays that that's no longer relevant because people are vegans. So how does this apply today? Well, even so, you know that instinct can become more sophisticated if it's integrated properly, and if you have someone in your organization who can think, let's say, like a black hat hacker, if you want to call them that, or however you want to moralize it, if you have a monster in your organization that's learned to integrate that, then they can actually prevent your systems from being hacked in the first place. Way better than anybody who's just a white hat hacker, or somebody who, let's just be more precise, someone who moralizes about what good or bad people are, which actions are good or bad. If you're the sort of person that moralizes, you're the kind of person that doesn't understand. And if you're the sort of person that doesn't understand people, then the only thing you have at your disposal is technical abilities. That's it. And so the problem is that leaves you in a position where you're only capable of reacting, right? Because you might be very good at rapidly learning technological concepts. When whenever a new means of exploiting a vulnerability comes about, you might have the technical wherewithal to quickly understand what's going on and then react to the attack as it's happening. But the best form of security is not reaction. If especially if attack is particularly successful, it might be too late if you're reacting against it as opposed to proactively securing your organization. It might be too late. So yeah, I mean that's what I would recommend. I'm going to be going into this topic in a little bit more detail. I'm going to be elaborating on it. I want to explore, I've renamed this channel Mental OPSEC. I want to explore certain proclivities, not just moralizing, but all sorts of psychological vulnerabilities that set people up for failure, whether you're the sort of person who might be described as a quote unquote black hat hacker, or if you're just a regular security professional. I want to really, I mean, eventually I'm going to go into some of the technical aspects of this, but I really want to go into the psychological vulnerabilities that leave people vulnerable to being exploited. If you're interested in that, you want to stay tuned for that, go ahead and click the subscribe button down below. Stay tuned for the next video. I'm going to be posting some more videos here shortly. Take care.